This is Matt Cohen for Matt Cohen Photo Workshops. Today I'm going to be taking a look at ISO and how that relates to the exposure triangle. We've already done shutter effects and aperture effects, and this is the last one in this series. So what is ISO exactly? Well, ISO controls the sensor and the sensitivity of the sensor is what's controlled by the ISO. So after the light comes in through the lens aperture, after it passes through the shutter, it hits the sensor, right? So the sensor converts the light that you're seeing into data that can then be displayed as a picture, right? Unlike aperture and shutter, ISO doesn't change how the picture looks very much, except for grain, noise, and a little bit of color. But as you remember from the other videos, the wide aperture versus narrow aperture, you're going to get, the very shallow depth of field. With a wide aperture, you're going to have no depth of field, and it's going to be flat if you have a narrow aperture, right? And if you have a very fast shutter speed, you're going to have sharp lines and frozen action. And if you have a slower shutter speed down here, then you're going to have motion blur. It'd be better for panning than it would be for freezing action, right? So as we take a look at what's going on with the ISO, we have the low ISO versus high ISO, right? And all the high ISO is doing is amplifying the signal. So the ISO is saying this is the level of amplification that we need to make this picture look proper, right? So a low or base ISO would be 100, and some of the highest ones I've seen 102,400. So this is really amplified, right? And if you think about like your car stereo, when you blast it too high, it sounds distorted and staticky, right? But it sounds better if it's down, in the medium kind of range, right? So a low ISO requires more light, and you're not going to have any noise or grain, and it's going to give you better color, right? The reason that you would go to a higher ISO is if there's less light, right? So 102,400 is probably too high, but say 6,400, right? That's going to require less light, but it's also going to give you more noise and grain, and it's going to give you a washed out kind of look where the colors might be a little bit more muted. So if you're shooting, right, you always want to set the aperture and the shutter speed, because those things are going to affect the content of the picture, right? If you don't have the right aperture in the camera, your depth of field is going to be off, or your focus is going to be off. If you don't have the right shutter speed, then you're either not letting enough light in and the picture is going to be too dark, or you're letting too much light in and it's going to be blurry, right? Because of the motion that goes on while the shutter is open. So you set the aperture where you want it, usually, down towards this end of the scale, right? For sports, 2.8 or 4, something like that. Then you set the shutter speed for the action, 1600. If you can get it, more would be better, right? And then you move the ISO to make the exposure look right. That's the third part of the exposure triangle, is the ISO controlling the sensor. So ISO is not very complicated, right? You can just think of it as the volume knob on your car stereo. But this video is more about reading the light and making the pictures that are possible in low light than it is strictly about the ISO, again, because it's such a simple thing. An ISO video would be 2 minutes long, because then you just show this is what grain looks like, this is what noise looks like, this is what low ISO looks like. So what we're trying to do is get more light to the sensor. Especially when it's dark, you need every bit of the light that's there to get to the sensor. So when it's dark, you want to be at the widest aperture that you can. It's not really time to think about, oh, I need more things in focus, because the more things in focus you get, it's going to be restricting the light, and then you're going to have to amplify that signal. That's how you get noise and grain, right? So you want to take the pressure off of the ISO by opening up the aperture, right? And then using the right speed. If you're shooting inside, you're not going to be at 8,000th of a second. That's just too fast. It's not letting enough light in, and you're not going to get a good picture because of that, right? You're going to be putting too much pressure on the ISO. You're going to be jacking this up, and then you're going to get more noise, grain, and a washed out kind of look. And you don't want that. So you want to have the shutter speed, right? You don't want to have it very much lower than 1600. You don't want to have it any lower than 1000. At that point, you accept the noise and the grain because you're not going to get a picture otherwise, right? So the idea is if you get your shutter and your aperture right, then the ISO is the last part of the puzzle. And then you just put that at the lowest possible number where you can still get a proper exposure. Once you set the aperture and the shutter speed, then you just move the ISO up or down until you get the right exposure. What does the right exposure look like? For me, it's skin tones. You can have somebody wearing a black hat and a white shirt. Neither one of those are the face or the hands. So I'm trying to get the skin tones right. What it doesn't mean, and we'll take a look at many pictures of this later on in this video, you're not trying to make dark objects bright. If you're shooting outside at night, the sky should be black, right? You don't need any detail in the sky because the sky is black. There's nothing there. Let it go all the way to black. If you're shooting and the lights are in the frame, let those bright lights blow out, go all the way to white. That's what they're supposed to do. This is why you have to shoot in manual, right? It's not a snob thing. It's not, but the camera won't make the same choices. It will blow the exposure. It will make the dark sky gray. It will make those bright lights, darker than they are. So when you're shooting in manual, what you're doing is you're saying, I want this particular part of the picture to look right. And then you just don't worry about the rest of it. Again, the sky goes black, those lights go pure white. And if you put this on some kind of auto setting, the camera is going to average everything together and it's not going to look right. This is your contribution to the exposure. You knowing this is what I want this to look like. And I don't want the camera to make those choices for me because believe me, the camera's not going to make the right choice most of the time. If the picture is good enough, grain and noise won't be the deciding factor. But if you're shooting a whole rodeo and every single picture that you have has grain and noise in it, it's not going to be good. Every picture is going to have that kind of indoor cast on it, and it's not going to be as sharp as it could be because of the grain and the noise. One of the things that you can do if you're shooting somewhere where you can't get a fast enough shutter speed is that you can shoot non-action. Non-action, instead of needing 1,000th or 1,600th of a second for a shutter speed, you might need 250th of a second, which takes the pressure way off of the ISO and allows you to shoot with a lower shutter speed and not have to worry about freezing the action because it's non-action. So we're going to take a look at a bunch of different examples of how all this works. I've shot in a million different situations and I have different examples that we're going to look at to kind of display this point. But again, the idea, I'm going to be talking about aperture and shutter speed and ISO, but the point of this is way more about making the pictures that are possible in low light. You don't want to shoot an indoor rodeo, a night rodeo, a covered rodeo like it was an outside rodeo. It will not end up good for you. It's not that you're not a good enough photographer. I can't do it. So when I have to shoot inside, I'm doing different things than I would be if it was outside. And this is why I pick rodeos that have better light, because I can make just a whole bunch more different kinds of pictures than I can having to be at the edges of what's possible because of the light. The thing to think about here is that it's all about light. ISO is converting the light into data. The aperture is allowing light to pass or restricting light. And the shutter speed is restricting light by opening and closing quickly or by staying open longer. All of photography is about light. Light is your raw material. photography, pictures of light. That's what it means. This video, in addition to being about ISO, is going to be about recognizing the different kinds of light that there is. Think of this as a covered arena. And what we're looking at here is like if you were in the dirt and looking up, you would see each of these are small lighting fixtures. The idea with these is that they're not very expensive per light, so you can cover a whole arena with them. But the downside of this is that everything is getting the same even kind of light no matter what, right? There's no position in here that you can be shooting from that's going to give you hard directional kind of light. You're not going to get a whole lot of shadows, right? Because this is even light coming straight down. And then really the problem with this is that because it's indoor and because there's a ceiling, the ceiling gets lit up more. And then light spills all the way around here so that your backgrounds end up being messy. So let's take a look at what that means in some pictures. This is a picture from the Southeastern Circuit Finals in Davie, Florida. And I had to go down there not to shoot action. I was working on a story about one of the cowboys, but the only rodeo that I could get to that he was competing at was here, right? And this is not the kind of arena that I would shoot in most of the time. Like, I just don't go to places like this if I can avoid it. And I certainly wouldn't fly all the way across the country to shoot a normal rodeo like this. But again, I was working on a story, so it didn't matter where it was. I was going to get a couple action pictures, but most of the story was going to be about his life. So I just needed pictures of him with his gear, pictures of him, portraits, things like that. So just like we saw in the diagram a minute ago, you can see how these are all evenly spaced out, how they're lighting up the ceiling, how they're lighting up all the stuff around here. This light is like office building light, fluorescent lights. You're not doing a photo shoot in your office, probably. That's why pictures like this aren't going to look very good. Like, I had to go to extreme measures shooting underneath the bucking chutes to get this picture. The point of it is you have this diffuse light that's hitting everything indiscriminately. And that's just not how photography really works out. This is another picture. This one was taken, much the same as this kind of situation. You can tell there's spill all the way around, right? The light that's supposed to be hitting the dirt is also hitting everything back here, right? So I got lucky. There was smoke in the air from like a fireworks show or something like that. So there's haze in here that kind of blocks the background out. But if you look at the light here, it's just coming straight down. It's not hitting the side of the horse at all. So the mane, his hat, his face a little bit, that's where the picture ends up being, because that's where the light is going. So the one thing I wanted to show you about this picture is that I made this picture in 2007, right? This was the first rodeo that I ever shot. And I was using a Nikon D200 and I was at 2500 ISO. 2500 ISO that long ago is not the same as 2500 ISO now. So let's look at, this is what noise looks like. This horse is one color, but you can see all of the noise and the grain in here makes it look like it's multicolored, right? This is the thing that people worry about, is this kind of noise, right? And the reason why is that it robs the picture of sharpness and clarity and details and all of that. It just doesn't look good, right? I was at the complete edge of what my camera was able to do back in 2007. Here's another picture. This was 11 years later at the same place, shooting with a better camera, a D5 at this point. Instead of shooting with a 2.8 lens, I was shooting with a 1.4 lens. So I was able to get 1,000th of a shutter speed, 1,000th of a second shutter speed, while keeping it at 6400 ISO. So let's look at what 6400 ISO looks like versus the 2500 from before. look how much detail you can see, like the horse's hair, look at this, right? The cinch, the rigging, the jeans, you can see the stitching, all of that, right? So you contrast that with this, where this is only at 2500, right? And it looks trashy. The funny thing about this picture is this was like the #1 Google image result for rodeo for about 10 years. The noise and the grain doesn't matter as much if people can see what's going on, but you wouldn't want to zoom in on this picture. This is what modern gear can do. So I'm not scared of shooting at 6400, but I don't do it very often because I try to stay out of situations where I need that fast. One of the reasons why I try to avoid shooting in situations like this, modern cameras can do 6400 with relatively low noise, no problem. When you shoot in a situation like this, and like I was talking about before, you have all the light spilling onto the seats in the background. This yellow right here is always going to be brighter than the horse. There's nothing I can do to this picture that's going to make the horse look more prominent and the background look less prominent. I did everything I could in the camera by shooting at 1.4 and getting that really narrow depth of field. But the problem is there's so much light spilling onto the background. Any changes I make to this picture is going to make the background even more prominent. And I just don't want to do that. And the reason that there's nothing you can do is because of how even that light is and how much it's spilling onto the background. So again, I just try to avoid situations like this. It's not that this picture is a throwaway necessarily, but this isn't going to look better than any of my other pictures. So yeah, I could go to this rodeo and cover it, and the rodeo could put things on their website and social media, and people could buy 8x10s, but it's not very satisfying to me because there's a limit to how good these pictures are going to look, and the light is that limit. This is another picture from the Southeastern Circuit Finals in Davie. We looked at the one from under the chute. This is the same arena. Looking at the EXIF here, we have 85 millimeter 1.4 at 1.4, the shutter speed 1/1250th of a second, which means that it's definitely fast enough to freeze the action. There's no motion blur here. There is the narrow depth of field due to the 85 1.4, and I'm only really at 2000 ISO, which isn't very high. There's no noise in this picture. It's fine. Again, what we're looking at though is that I just don't have the ability to shoot him and really set him off from the background because there's so much light spilling onto these metal bleachers. And it wouldn't even really matter if there were fans in the seats. This was a extra run after the rodeo. So you have more reflection from these seats, but again, you have these red support beams here that are getting the same light. It's just, there's just nothing I could have done here other than, maybe shot like a very, very, very narrow picture of him with a much longer lens, like a 200 f2 or a 300 2.8, and then just tried to set him off against the dark background. But there's just a limit to what you can do. You have this really even kind of light coming down and hitting his hat. There's not really very much fill coming in underneath that. So to me, pictures like this and arenas like this are just very limiting. And again, that's why I don't go. I just can't make the kind of pictures that I want to make in situations that have this kind of lighting. It just doesn't work for me, right? So this is what we're looking at. If you're shooting in an indoor arena or a covered arena, just understand that there's a limit to what you're going to be able to do. You could strobe it, right? And we'll get into that a little bit later, or maybe in another video, but the idea of strobing rodeo is not a good one, right? The time that it takes, the investment in the gear, setting up, tearing down, and then really you're either getting very lucky or you're just nuking the whole arena, in which case you're making it look like less good outside pictures. Again, I just try to stay out of situations like this because there's just nothing that I can do with the light that's going to be satisfying to me. This is another kind of situation, but this has fewer lights than all the other ones. This is just a practice pen kind of situation, and the light in here is really bad. So let's look at the EXIF here. So I'm shooting with the 70 to 200, and I'm at 6400 and 2.8 500th of a second, which is, as you can see here, not fast enough to freeze the action. This was the first time that I was at this pen. It was 2012. They said, oh yeah, come up and shoot, and I didn't realize that there wasn't going to be enough light. The next few times I shot here, I used speed lights because it was a small enough kind of arena, but it's just, again, you're not going to get very good pictures inside in a place that has as bad lighting as this. This isn't, Matt said, don't go shoot here. That's not what I'm saying. But I want you to understand that my pictures look the way they do because I choose very carefully where I'm going to shoot. If you look at these pictures, this doesn't scream, oh, Matt Cohen probably took those pictures. This one, yeah, I mean, it's 5 years ago. This one's 11 years ago or whatever. But even then, people who are looking at these pictures wouldn't say, oh, definitely Matt took that. Whereas if you look at a lot of my other pictures, you can tell right away, right? And the only reason that is because I choose where I'm shooting very, very carefully. So I wanted to take a look at the other kinds of light because it's really important to be able to analyze the light when you go somewhere. You should know this is white, this is fluorescent and it looks green, or this is sodium and it looks orange, or this is LED and it looks bright white. You should know kind of what that looks like because it helps you set your white balance, and then it also helps you plan out your shoot. This is just a diagram. So this is kind of what like a pro football stadium or a baseball stadium or something like that would look like, where there are multiple banks of lights all the way around, angled very carefully to give you even light all the way through here. The difference is that this light is coming from an angle instead of from directly overhead. It's also, these are usually LED, which is going to make things very white. The real key to all of this is that these are very, very bright lights and they're filling in all of the shadows. There's not going to be, in a situation like this, as long as the play is happening on the playing field and not in the stands, you're going to have a very, very lit up picture of that. So we'll take a look at what this looks like in practice. I have a couple pictures that I made. This was at the Winter Classic at the Levi Stadium where the 49ers play, but this was the Kings and the Sharks playing hockey once in a, I don't know, 20-year kind of setup or something like that. So part of my job was to walk around and get overall pictures to show kind of how they were using the space and what it all looked like to the people who were there. So let's take a look at the light here. You can tell everything down here, this is just like nuked with light. There's just so much light there. And then we look up here at these banks of light right here, and there are rodeos that would have this much light for a whole arena. And they would be on a couple poles and they would be pointed haphazardly or something like that. And you would get shadows everywhere, all over the place, because it just wouldn't be covering the ground as evenly as these are. So as you're looking at these, look at how many individual lights there are that go through here. And look at how they're a little bit dimmer here and then a little bit brighter here and a little bit dimmer here. That's because these are all aimed at very, very specific points all through here so that you have no bright spots, no dark spots, no shadows. Everything here has been calibrated perfectly to light up this floor. Most of you are shooting rodeo. Most of you aren't shooting pro football or hockey or something like that. So you're just not going to have the luxury of this all that often, but I want you to recognize what the ideal is. See how many individual lights there are here? And then remember that there are lights on either side and on the ends. So this is multiples of what you're likely to see at a rodeo arena, many multiples of it. Plus, again, whiter lights, brighter lights, all of that. This is what those lights look like from behind. And I kind of wanted to zoom in on this and show you what this actually looks like in practice. You can kind of see how each of these lights is slightly aimed differently, right? And then you can also see on top of those lights, what do you have here? Reflectors. So these reflectors are keeping all of the light that are coming out of these going down to where they're supposed to. You're not losing light. You're not having the light go in places where you don't want it to go because of that reflector. Again, this is aimed, and then the reflector is keeping the light where it should be going. So this is a very, very expensive lighting system. And this is why you're not going to see this at college, or, major colleges you will, but not smaller colleges, not smaller sports, certainly not at the high school level, and basically almost never at the rodeo level, right? You're just not going to see situations like this. So I pulled a picture from a football game that was taken at the same exact stadium, right? The hockey's different because you have the ice reflecting back up. So I wanted to use a picture that had grass reflecting back up. But this is what it looks like when the light is coming from all different angles and filling in all of the shadows and is bright enough to get the job done, and also is white to the point where the picture doesn't look weird, right? So all of that is really important for your pictures. So look at where the shadows are. Like this right here is like a shadow of his hand and the ball right here, but that shadow is almost completely filled in by like other light coming from different directions, right? Look how underneath his helmet, you can see his face is perfectly illuminated, right? Because that light is coming in from all of these different angles here. Think about if these lights were all just overhead lights, like in the rodeo pictures that we were just looking at, his face is completely below his helmet. So his face would, if he was running this football in a rodeo arena, his face would be completely dark, right? There would be these crazy shadows below the ball in his hand, and it just would look unnatural because the light wouldn't be pure white, right? So this is the benefit of shooting in pro stadiums like this. You just get better light, right? But mostly we're shooting in rodeo arenas and we don't get that choice at all. So I pulled this to show kind of what good light looks like versus what bad light looks like. So look at what's happening here, and then look at what's happening here, right? Huge difference, just in every single way. Color, amount of light, the direction that it's coming from, the shadows, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm not showing you this because you only want to shoot in places like this. I'm just trying to educate you on being able to go to a new place, evaluate what the light is doing there, and then capitalize on it. This is more of a common rodeo setup, especially outdoors. So this is where you have like a really tall lighting pole here, 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 and here, and they have, maybe either 2 or hopefully 4 or 8 different lights. But this is kind of the way most outdoor arenas end up being lit, where there are bright spots underneath where the lights are. And then there are dark spots like closer to the rail, in the middle, in between where that light is coming down. These are like cones of light, right? So we'll take a look at all the rest of the pictures that we're going to take a look at in this video were made in more or less situations like this, where there were bright spots and dark spots. And just like we were talking about in the overall, we want to take the pressure off of the ISO by having the aperture be as wide and, not having a shutter speed that's too high for what you're doing, right? So we're taking the pressure off of the ISO, and part of that is being choosy about where we're shooting. If you are in a situation like this where these are the dark parts and these are the bright parts, right? If you're just shooting wherever, then you have to account for the shadows and the light not hitting your subject. But if you are, let's say the bucking shoots are right here or something like that, and the timed event shoots are right here. So I want to be maybe right here and shooting the timed event stuff that either comes here or right here, right? And I want to be either here or here for the bucking events, because the best case scenario is they go out a little bit and they go into the part that's really light. That will allow me to make that choice to say, okay, well, I'm not going to worry about the stuff that's happening in the dark because I'm not going to get a good picture of that anyway. And I'm going to wait and hope basically that things happen in those cones of light so that you can get those subjects properly illuminated and the background, because there's not going to be a whole lot of spill or anything like that. You might get a really dark kind of background. So that's all the rest of the pictures that we're going to look at in this video. But for now, I want you to be kind of thinking about the ideal lighting situation like this, and then the common kind of indoor covered situation like this, and then this sketch where it is the more common outdoor night rodeo kind of situation. So these are all really important to kind of stash in your head and be able to walk into a new place and say, this is what I'm going to do here because this is what the light is allowing me to do. And we'll take a look at a bunch of examples coming up. This is the layout of the Reading Rodeo. Let's take a look at where the lights are. We're going to do this with each of the rodeos of the pictures that we're looking at. So you can see there's one bank here, there's one here, and then this is another lighting pole right here, and then this is another lighting pole right here. And that's it. They have lights that are more or less evenly directed. There's 8 lights on each of these. So, there are kind of bright and dark spots as you go through here based on where each of these 8 lights are pointed. The idea here is that I'm not, again, just going to shoot this rodeo at night straight up and take what I can get, because those dark spots and the really bright backgrounds are things that I just don't want, right? And we'll take a look at what that looks like in some of these pictures. Barrel racing, obviously, D5, 70 to 200, and I was at 2.8 thousandth of a second, which is like the slowest that I want to be at for freezing action. And then the ISO, that's pretty high, 12,800, but I don't know. There's noise, like you can see it when you really zoom in like that, but this noise isn't really robbing me of the detail. You can still see the embossing on the saddle, and you can still see the grain of the horse and the embroidery on the bridle here. So, that doesn't really bother me very much. The reason that I pulled this is to show a few different things. Like, again, this video is much more for understanding how to shoot in light like this, and also to really be able to break down pictures to understand what's happening. The first thing that I want to show here is that, so there's the scoreboard that's in the background. And the thing that's important about that is that I'm not letting that scoreboard contribute to the decision that I'm making for the exposure. I'm not trying to shoot what's going on the scoreboard. So the scoreboard can go to bright white because that's all I can really do with it. Just like this is going all the way to black. I'm not trying to average all of this stuff out and make the sky gray and make this gray or whatever. That's not what it looked like when I was there. And I'm not going to jam the ISO up as high as I possibly can go to try to make that sky a little bit lighter than it is, because it wasn't light when we were there. And putting the ISO up higher is going to make this even brighter. Just not what I want to do. What I'm trying to do is get this, right? The skin tone right. That is the point of this, is to you're shooting people and animals, this is more or less what color and the brightness of the horse. This is what the barrel looked like. So the reason that it's important to shoot in manual is that auto settings would never get this. They just wouldn't. This is too bright and it would bring this down. This is too dark and it would try to bring this up, and it would just have this ridiculous kind of exposure that would never work for you. So you have to recognize what you're shooting. And to me, getting the skin tones right is the important thing every single time. And then you're letting the things that are dark be dark, and you're letting the things that are bright be bright. And that's the best chance that you're going to have to get a picture in situations like this. This is a much, much different picture, and I was trying to do something very, very different here. We're looking at this, right? I didn't really have a choice as to where the barrel was going to be set up. And you can see how it's darker here than it is here, right? And it's darker here than it is here. Like, I just didn't have a choice as to how I was going to shoot this, because you're shooting one barrel or the other barrel, whatever. This is much, much different. So let's look at the settings of this. And so I had the shutter speed way higher, right? 1/2000th of a second. I was not shooting with a 2.8. I was shooting with a 200 f2. So I was at f2. But even though I had the higher shutter speed, the ISO was significantly lower than it was on the last one. So the reason for that is that I camped out in the place where the light was hitting. And that just happened to be where the majority of the steer wrestlers were catching. If I didn't recognize that, my pictures would not have been as good as they were. So I had more light to work with here, which means that I'm taking the pressure off of the ISO, going from 12,800 in the last picture to 4,000 in this picture, right? Which means there's not really very much grain going on here at all, right? Even at 4,000. The thing about this picture is you might be saying, oh, well, why were you at 1/2000th of a second when you could have had a lower shutter speed, right? To freeze the action, you could have frozen it at 1,000th or 1250th or 1600ths. Yeah, but the thing is that the faster the shutter speed, the smaller the particles that you're going to be able to freeze. So I would have been able to freeze him and the steer sliding through the mud at 1,000th of a second, no question, because they're just not moving very fast. But this picture is way more about the mud and like its 3D kind of quality as it goes into and out of the depth of field. That only can be frozen at very, very high shutter speeds. So I put a little bit more pressure on the ISO than I needed to, right? But I did it for a specific reason, to be able to freeze those droplets in the air. I could have absolutely, let's say that I put this at 1250th of a second, I could have put the ISO at 2500 or something like that, and there would have even been less grain. But I'm trading a little bit of grain for being able to stop those droplets of mud in midair like that. And in your own photography, you're going to have to make the choices. Does it make sense to do this? Does it not? But that comes from experience. This is like the worst case scenario. So you have all of this light that's spilling onto the background here. You have these people here. The distances weren't right because this action was happening closer to the chutes than I was. So even though you have this incredible situation going on here, this bull in midair getting ready to just ram this rider into the ground, and then the bullfighter getting in the way, I can't really do anything to this picture because look at how there's shadow on his face, right? Because the light is, mostly coming kind of this way, and it's just not hitting his face. But then you have all this white in the background. So any kind of adjustments that I'm going to make to this picture is going to make the background even worse. And because he's wearing, dark knee pads and shoes and shorts, and because the bull is dark, the subject just gets completely lost here. If this had been like natural light or something, it just would have looked much better, because whatever the angle that it was coming in probably wasn't going to be bouncing straight off of the background and hitting me. This is the choice that you make when you go to shoot in places like this, that you might be incredibly lucky, incredibly prepared, and make a great picture, but then be undone by what's going on in the background. That's certainly what's happening here. This is an overview of the arena at Plymouth. This is definitely one of the more difficult lighting situations that I've had to deal with. This is a fairly big arena. There are like it looks like 6 lights there and 6 lights here, and then 4 and 4. That's tough, because if you look at how the light is distributed, right, you're going to have kind of like a bright spot in this corner from this light, and then you're going to have kind of a bright spot here, which is the rough stock shoots are right here. This light here is going to be pretty good for the rough stock. This light here is going to be okay for like the beginning of the roping runs. These lights right here are pretty far away, and it's only going to be something like this, right? So this middle part of the arena is getting way, way less light than all the other parts are. And again, if I would have just tried to shoot this as, oh, I'm here to shoot a rodeo, and I'm just going to shoot it regular as if it was daytime, or as if the light was even throughout the whole way, I just wouldn't have gotten good pictures. There's no question about it. Too much of this very big arena is not getting enough light. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. So you can see how bright this part is, and then the very head of the bull here, and then this part of the cowboy and like his helmet, right? That's because that light is coming straight down onto them. The problem here is that this isn't going to get me good pictures from shooting from here. It's just not. And that's because the lights coming from this direction, from behind me, are so far away that they're just not contributing at all to the exposure here. There is no light that's hitting this. This is just like reflected light or whatever. It's just too far away from where the lights are behind. It's just not hitting him enough to make this into a good picture. So even though this is a pretty dramatic kind of buck off, the light just isn't doing what I wanted it to. So if I was going to be not thinking about what I was shooting and what the conditions were, and I was just shooting opposite the bucking shoots all the time, this is what would have happened. The thing is that I just didn't shoot this rodeo like this, because once I saw that this was what was happening, I just didn't want to be in this position anymore, because the light is lighting up the backside of these things, not the front side. So what does that mean in terms of ISO? So just to be able to get the front side of the cowboy to where you can see it, I had to be at f2 12/50th of a second, which is on the lower side of the shutter speed for freezing action. And then the ISO is still pretty high at 6400. This is because I'm making things harder on myself by letting the light hit the back of what I'm shooting and not the front of it. You have to be present. You have to understand what's happening in the lighting situation, in the arena, with the event that's going on. The more you know about that, react to it, make the necessary adjustments, the better the pictures will look. If you don't, and you just shoot this as if it was any other rodeo in a lighting situation that was more advantageous to you, you're just going to walk out of there with bad pictures. No question about it. You can see the Ferris wheel in the background of this picture. This was kind of a big deal figuring out the Ferris wheel picture here, but that's not what we're looking at here. I left it in here because like this right here would definitely contribute to what the camera was deciding if I left this on automatic settings. Having something this bright right in the middle of the frame would have definitely made the exposure different than it was. So I needed to be there and be exerting control over this and not letting the camera decide. So 1,000th of a second, the lowest that I would want to get away with for shutter speed, 1.4. So I'm letting a lot of light in through the aperture, and ISO 3200, which is still a high ISO, but it's lower than the other ones that we were looking at. No noise really to speak of in this picture. It's fine as far as that goes. The reason I pulled this one is that the important part is looking at the dirt to figure out what's happening with the lights. So we were looking at the diagram a minute ago, and we saw where the light was coming in the corner, and I said that was going to be good for the timed event shoots early on, right? Look at how the light is, this is where the light is happening. All of this is darker, and all of this right here is darker. I'll get rid of this so that you can see that a little bit better. Look at the difference here, right? It's bright here, and then it's dark here. That's because she's in that cone of light right there. So I don't have to have the ISO quite as high as on the other pictures because she's getting the good light and it's on the side that I'm on. Looking at the dirt can tell you where the bright spots are and where the dark spots are. And you just want to be shooting at things that are in the bright spots and have the dark stuff be in the background and let that go as dark as it possibly can, because that's what the sky looked like. Here's another one that would have been completely messed up by any kind of automatic settings. These are those lights that are in the background, and this breakaway roper is getting ready to rope. So there's no light, like there's light coming down here. You can see it's lighting up her hat, but it's not getting here. The thing that works about this picture is this line of light right here, and that's coming from this light. And I chose to leave this in, and I just let this go completely white. I let the dark go completely dark. I'm not as worried about this side of her face because I have the illumination on this side of her face, and then we have the rope going through here. This is obviously a rough stock picture, and I chose this one because this is a good one for breaking down how the light is happening. So you can see right up here at the top, you can see this shadow right here. That's the crown of his hat that's creating that shadow. You can see how much light is getting on the brim outside of that shadow, right? The light is coming kind of straight down like that. And as you can see, I'm shooting this right as it's going through there because there's tons of light right here. On the bronc rein, you can see all of the little details there in the mane of the horse, and then the shaps here, right? But his chest right here and his thigh and chaps, that is all in the shadow because the only light that's coming in and contributing to this exposure is coming in behind him. So again, it's lighting up the back of him more than the front, but I got lucky because the horse was kind of curving around and I got the light there. Not worried about this going black. I'm not worried about how bright all of the fair lights are or whatever, because I'm trying to get his skin tone right, and I did get his skin tone right. So there's not very much noise in this picture either. This was even at 5,000 ISO, like, that's nothing to be worried about as far as noise goes here. So 85 millimeter, 1.4, 12/50th of a second, again on the lower side to freeze the action, but it's done. And then we'll look at this picture, which is the same guy after his ride for breaking down the picture purposes. There is light that's coming down here, right? That's illuminating his hat, but it's leaving his face. In the shadow, you're getting a little bit of light from the other side that's lighting up this side of his face, but then all of this is getting blocked by his body. So this is all in the dark. And then this I'm not worried about, and this I'm not worried about. Looking at these pictures, you should be able to go to your own pictures and look at the things that are creating the shadows, which way the light is coming from. And then you can kind of reverse engineer maybe what's good about the picture and what's bad about the picture. This works for me because of this side of his face getting some light. If the whole thing was dark like this, it wouldn't work. To be able to read this picture, I have to be able to figure out, okay, well, this is the crown of his hat, and this is the shadow that's creating. So I'm guessing that he's walking basically right underneath the light at this point. The more you can do this when you're looking at your pictures, and the more you can do this when you're on location and shooting and figuring out which way is the light coming from. Is it bright enough? Do I have the right backgrounds? All of that stuff is really important when you're shooting at the margins of what your camera can do. The very similar one to the last one in terms of looking at it as where's the light coming from? Obviously right here, right? He's still in the corner on a team roping run, so he's basically right underneath the light. The light is completely illuminating his hat, but it's completely in shadows here. And only this light coming from across the arena is just barely lighting up his face. And you can see, look at how these shadows go right here. So you know the light is coming from this way. His shirt is puffing out, and that's what's causing the shadow here, right? The same as here, same as here, same as here. So you can read pictures based on the shadows and where the light is going and where it's not going. This, I got lucky here, like as we were looking at the Redding barrel racing picture, that one wasn't in a bright spot. This one definitely was in a bright spot. You can see how bright the dirt is down here and how dark the dirt is back here. That was good. This light is coming from the grandstand and it's coming straight down. It's illuminating this side of the horse. It's not really illuminating this side of the horse at all. You can see how her her hat is lit up, and that's what's causing the shadow right here on it. And then in the background, depth of field is taking care of this, right? This is all out of focus. Here, I'm not worried about how bright these out of focus things from the lights from the carnival are, and I'm not worried about the black sky in the background. That's exactly what it looked like when I was there. That's what I'm trying to make the picture look like, right? I'm not trying to average this out. So this is really bright and this is darker than it is. It just doesn't make any sense to do that. And it also doesn't look good, right? It looks over processed in the picture. No, nobody wants to look at that. We're looking at this, the horse is coming straight on. You have the half of the horse in light and half of the horse in dark. But then if you let the horse go around the barrel a little bit, then the light is hitting all of the horse that's facing the camera, right? So the light is coming this way, and because the horse is angled, you're getting light all the way through here. You can see this bright spot on her shoulder and then shadow on her chest here. You can see the shadow that the horse is creating on the barrel here, and you can see how much brighter the light is that she's in than all the background, right? That's why it's important to shoot things that are in the light and try to use things that are in the dark as the background. This is another one of the timed event with the light from the corner. The reason that I am showing this one is that see how the dark background here is set off against him, and he stands out because of that, because he's getting light on this side of him, and this part of the grandstand that's underneath the roof is not getting any light. So this just jumps off the page because of that. I am always looking for situations where I can put the subject in the light and have the background either be really far away to the point where there's nothing there, or have a dark sky or shadows or something like that. This, again, is the opposite of what we were looking at in this picture, right? Where I'm shooting into the shadows and the light is coming from behind. You're just never going to get a truly great picture doing that. This is the arena at St. Paul, Oregon. This is a very, very different kind of setup. The lights are on these poles that go kind of around everywhere. I think there's here, 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 and here, right? What that does, this is a gigantic arena. Like this is a football field. So there's even more kind of area in there than what a football field is. The thing about these lights is that they do kind of something like this. So this is all kind of lit up here, but then the vast kind of middle of the arena is not getting very much of the light, which it dramatically changes how I shot this rodeo when I was shooting it. So the bucking chutes are here, the timed event chutes are right beside the bucking chutes. Tie down roping goes straight out like this. Team roping goes out like this, right? So the beginning of those runs, okay, maybe the end of the team roping run would be okay, but the end of the tie down runs and the steer wrestling runs are going to be out in this area where there's no light. The bucking stuff, there's going to be more light right near, but as they're going out, it's going to be less and less light. So it's not, again, not a rodeo that you can just shoot as if you were at any other rodeo. It just doesn't work like that. You have to understand not only where the lights are, but what they're doing and where the action is likely to happen. And then you mash all those things up in your head and you say, okay, well, the best chance that I'm going to have is by having my back to the lights here and shooting the action as it goes through the light that's on the dirt here. That's really important to know that kind of stuff. So I'm going to look at these two pictures back to back. It's really kind of underlines the luck aspect of all of this. So these are both riders that are getting bucked off right next to their horses. This horse is getting all of this light from the light that's over here coming down like this. And you can see because his body is open back that way to where the light is, there's light coming onto his body here, right? And that allows this picture to be lit up properly. But look at this one where instead of his body being open towards the light, it's closed towards the light. So this light that's coming here is hitting the back of him, right? You can kind of see it on his hand and on his shirt cuff here a little bit, but all of this is dark and that just doesn't look good to me. You could have put the ISO up in this situation, or you could have in post-processing brought the exposure up. But the problem is that you have all this light hitting these white bucking chutes behind it. So the more you try to bring this up, the more this comes up and it just doesn't look good, right? And that's the risk of shooting in a situation where you only have these cones of light. You don't have light that's crossing over and double up in some places or whatever to provide that really even light that goes all the way across the arena. And the same here. This is closer to the bucking chutes and, you know, it's an acceptable kind of exposure if it's a little bit dark maybe. And then this is like a couple hops away into the arena and it's the same. These are both taken with the same settings, right? 300, 2.8 at 2.8, 12/50th of a second and 6400. You can see how much more light this picture is getting because it was made closer to the bucking chutes where all the light was. And then you look at this one, it just goes in, you know, the further out he goes into the arena, the less light he's going to be. Would automatic settings have worked here? Probably not, because you have that wall in the background that's getting all of that light and it just would have been fooled by all of this. So I'm definitely willing to know that I'm going to have to get my pictures earlier in the ride while they're still in the light and just take my chances the further they go out in the arena. This is one of the team roping pictures that's finishing in the corner, and you can see how much light is kind of coming onto him from the lights that's in this corner and that's right behind me coming this way. So that's lighting him up. It's getting the skin tone right. And I'm not letting her get fooled by these white panels and this dark shadows all the way back here. Right? What I'm doing is putting myself in a situation where the action is going to come into the light, which I knew because a successful team roping run is going to curve right towards those lights. And then I'm going to be there to make a picture of it. The difference between this and this, it's huge, right? He's right underneath the light here. And this is out in the middle of the arena where it's way too far away. And this is a victory lap. And it's funny because this is where the light is the best. So this is a junior taking a victory lap, and you can see how much light is getting onto his face right here, onto the front here, onto his hat, right? And there's not really even any shadows because it's kind of coming from this way and from behind. So this is more like the picture of the Stanford running back that we were looking for, where the shadow close to the light and having the light being very evenly distributed. This is the arena at Red Bluff, and this is definitely one of the tougher arenas that I've shot in. The reason for that, you can see this is the rodeo arena, and that's already pretty big. And then you have the track, which is right here, which is wide enough for regular horse racing. And then you have this area right here that's the front part of the bleachers before you get to where the lights are. Here, here, and here. Those are the only lights that are shining this way. So if you're shooting at night from this side of the arena towards either the bucking chutes or even towards the timed event chutes, you're not shooting with very much light behind you at all. We'll get to who shoots like that in a minute, but the idea is that there's really not that many lights to cover a really big arena. And again, 1, 2, there's 3 banks there. There's one here in this corner. There's one in this corner, one in this corner, and one in this corner. It's just not enough. You get kind of these areas here that have more light than others. You do get a fair bit of light out right here in front of the bucking chutes because you're very close to the 2 lights from behind. But the real problem for this is that the lights on the corners aren't helping very much, and the ones opposite and the grandstand are just way too far away. And they're old lights, and I think they just got new LEDs, but they're not very bright either. So it's very difficult to shoot here. And the good news is that it's a 3 days of slack and 3 days of rodeo, and you don't have to shoot the one night performance, right? So I do shoot it, but you'll see in the coming up pictures why I don't like shooting it for action. And nobody says you have to shoot action. So you can see in this picture, everything, there's just like a yellow cast all over everything. There's that bright yellow wall in the background because that's getting as much light as everything else. This picture was made at 6400 ISO, and it's not really making a dent in the picture, even at 500 seconds, which is 1/500th of a second, which is too slow to really be freezing the action. This picture isn't sharp because of that. But then this is the same, all the same settings as far as the lens length and the aperture, 2.8, 1/500th of a second. But in this one, the ISO is up 2 full stops, 3 full stops from there. So that's what that looks like. If you remember in the beginning of this, I was talking about how the ISO is like a volume. So think about that you just turn the volume up from this picture to this picture. Everything that was happening in the picture is going to be the same. It's just you're making the sensor much more sensitive, and that's why it looks brighter like this. But I just don't like how this picture looks. It still has a cast to it. I still had to do significant work to make it look like a neutral kind of color. And again, there's 2 other rough stock performances at Red Bluff, so there's just no need to be fighting it like this and shooting over 20,000 ISO to try to shoot a whole rodeo performance. You're just going to get a whole bunch of pictures that look bad. I just don't like doing that, so I don't do it. This is about the best case scenario for shooting action at night there. This is 4,000 ISO, and I'm using a 1.4 lens, and I'm able to get 1/800th of a shutter speed, which is kind of below bare minimum, but it works for this picture. The idea is that if you look at this picture and try to break it down, like we've been breaking down the other pictures, you can see that there's a shadow here and a shadow here. That's coming from the lights that are behind and coming down this way, right? And those are what's making those shadows. As you can see, there's no shadow here at all. because these lights are too far away to affect this picture at all, other than being in the frame of the picture. This ended up working out, but it's not a straight up action picture. It's much more of an overall kind of scene setting picture, or just to let people know that there was an atmosphere there, not just cropping everything right to the bull rider. This is what a good action picture at night is going to look like. And basically, I'm just camped out underneath one of the banks of lights and hoping that the action came right towards me, which it did. You can see there's no shadows on the bull rider, really, or like the bull. There's a shadow on the bull from the bull rider here, but if you look at the rider, this is like completely, he's right in the sweet spot of the light. Same with the bull there. You can tell it's still like a little bit of a yellow cast, and you still have these yellow and white shoots behind it, which is really not a great background to have, because all of the light is coming, that's hitting the bull rider is also hitting those shoots. So any kind of work that you're going to do on this picture is going to affect both of those. And again, this to me just looks like a bad daytime picture. So a good nighttime picture equals a bad daytime picture for action, a lot of the time. So I just don't like doing this. Most of the time at Red Bluff on the night performance, I shot from behind the shoots like this. You need a much slower shutter speed to get this, but you're letting in more light because of that shutter speed. Again, these lights back here are just decoration. They're not helping the exposure at all. You can see there's a shadow back here because the light, is coming this way and is not hitting this at all. That creates that shadow. But you have really good light on the shaps, and you can see the tooling and the fringe and all of that. You can see the bronc rein, and then his hand, again, is the right exposure. Like, that's how I was judging what the exposure was going to be. I was just trying to get a good skin tone. This was 1,000th of a second. I didn't need very much because they're just coming out of the chute at that point. 1.4 on a 24 1.4, and then 3200 on the ISO. No noise really what to speak of. Like, look at the detail here. That's, when you can see the grain of the leather, you don't have too much noise, in my opinion. Here's another one where he's not moving at all. This is ISO 4000, 1.4, and 1,000th of a second again on the shutter. There's a lot of light coming down on him from those lights behind. You can see how there's this line here underneath. So you have the two lights that are kind of crossing like this. They're lighting up the top of his hat and then making the shadow down there, but got good light on his vest, good light on the bronc rein, and the right exposure on his hand. I make a lot of pictures like this at nighttime rodeos where the light isn't good enough, because I would rather have pictures like this than bad yellowish dark action pictures. It's just not even a contest to me. When I want to shoot raw stock, I go to a place that has enough lighting to do that. I don't need to force it at night rodeos because there's nothing that I can do to defy physics. I'm subject to everything that you guys are subject to, as far as shooting in low light, shooting in bad colored light, and trying to stop the action. There's not a lot of leeway there when you're dealing with a situation that is as old and yellow and badly placed as they were here. There's just no other way to look at it. This is the arena at Vernal. This one is kind of tricky. You have so there's lights here, 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 and then behind the grandstand, and then I think there's another set over here somewhere maybe. Anyway, this is a fairly decently lit arena, and there are ways to get to the sky in this one that we don't have in some of the other ones with grandstands like this. The problem, and we're going to take a look at this in a minute, but these lights behind here kind of shoot this way and get blocked by this stuff here, the announcer stand and whatever. Um, and then the same comes from this way. So you have this area right in front of the chutes that is very dark because these lights right here are traveling a really long way, and these lights behind here are getting blocked by that little building there. So we'll take a look at what that looks like here. So this is ISO 4000, f2, and 1/1600th of a second. So this is well within what my camera can do as far as not being too noisy or grainy. The problem here is, just like I was talking about, this whole side of this bull right here is in the shadow because the light that is over, off the camera high over here is getting hit by the announcer stand that's over here, and it's creating this shadow. So you can see there's another light that's like right back here that's shooting down here, but it's lighting up the outside of the bull, and I'm shooting the inside of the bull. So it just doesn't work like that, especially with all of that white and the white fence and people wearing light color shirts in the background. Again, it's very hard to adjust this picture to make it look good because the light is not only not where I want it to be, but it is where I don't want it to be. So that just kind of makes it a mess. This shows that in reverse because you have the light that's over here is contributing here and getting the front of the bull rider and the front of the bull, which is fine, but it's also lighting up all of this other stuff back here. And then because this is where that announcer stand is, that other light doesn't have a chance to shoot down here at all. So it just doesn't look right. It's not like this is a throwaway picture. It's not like somebody wouldn't buy this picture necessarily, but it's just not a picture that I want to put my name on because I'm really not doing what I should be doing. I'm not shooting the light. I'm shooting this as a rodeo, right? But my pictures come from figuring out where the light's going to be and shooting it like that, not from doing it like this. So I just don't shoot like this very often. 3200 f2, 1600ths of a second. Settings are fine. Look at his skin tone. That's where you want it to be. It's just there's too much other stuff going on and you don't have that other light really contributing to the picture. So these are the freestyle bullfighting pictures. So we're just going to look at a couple of those, and let's go back here and we'll show where this took place because it's really important to be able to understand. That's why I'm showing you these overhead views, right? So those two bull rides took place right here and were getting blocked by the announcer stand. The freestyle bullfights took place here. So I was able to use a little bit of this light, a little bit of this light, and a little bit of this light over here to light up everything that was going on in the freestyle bullfighting. There wasn't anything that was blocking what was going on there. That leads to better pictures. So I've only been to Vernal the one time, so I'm shooting the bull riding, and I just there was no planning that could have showed me, oh, the announcer stand is going to block our own lights from hitting the dirt. There's no way I could have known that, right? But this is what it looks like when you're out into the arena and you're able to use the light that's there. This is ISO 5000, f2, and 1600ths of a second, but look at the skin tone here. Look at how lit up the bull is. Look at how the separation makes the picture look so much better, right? That's because this is happening out in the arena where it's getting the light, and this is happening in a shadow when the light is where it shouldn't be. So that's a pretty big difference, and that's the kind of thing that you should know before you go shoot somewhere. And when you're there, you should be paying attention to it. This is also kind of what that looks like. Like this is just getting so much better light from multiple different directions than that original bullfighting picture, or that original bull riding picture was. This one is even a little bit brighter at 6400 ISO, but this noise is not. When you can see the detail in his jersey and you can see, the shoelaces versus the tongue of his shoe, at that point in time, I'm not worried about noise or grain at all. This is the arena at Gilroy. And I know this arena really well because I shoot here every year. The lights here, 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 and then the same on the other side. I think here, 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 and then somewhere around here, I think. This is a classic situation of circles in the dirt near where the lights are and large dark spots in here. This is a classic rodeo where you cannot shoot the night performance the same as you would shoot anything else, right? Either outside or outside under the sun or under really bright lights or something like that. This arena is too big and it has too many dark spots that the pictures just won't look good at all. So we'll go back to the chart of what we were talking about here. This particular setting has four poles of lights, but let's say it's the same, right? It's making the way they're pointed, it's making the same circles in here. So at Gilroy, the timed event shoot is there, and the bucking shoots are right there in the middle. This is largely a situation of I'm just going to try to shoot with my back to these lights as much as I can. So even along here is a good place to shoot the timed events from because you're using the light from these two lights to get right here as they're coming out and then here as they're going down a little bit. This one over here would be good for the team roping. Clear that up a little bit. This one here for the team roping, right? If the runs were coming this way, then you could set up, over here somewhere and use some of that light. But in general, this, just like I would keep the path of the sun in my head during a daytime rodeo, let's say that started at 5 p.m. or something like that, where the sun was still fairly high in the sky, but then by 8:30 it was going to be dusk and I had to be able to adjust as things were going on, right? This is the same exact thing, except the light doesn't change. So it's easier for me to figure out where things are going to look their best. And then what my job is to figure out how can I put those things into that light, but also have dark backgrounds, right? This is why my pictures look like they do, because I take all of this stuff into consideration. I'm not looking at my pictures from one place and saying, oh, these are all better than this other place. If that's the case, I'm just not going to go to that other place anymore. I'm going to go where I can get better pictures. So this is rough stock. This is coming straight out of the shoots. As you can see here, when we go to break down this picture, there's no light whatsoever on his face because it's all coming from behind, and it's either hitting his back or his neck or his hat right there. So you can see his hand, the skin tone is fine. That's what I'm looking for. But there's just so much light coming straight down this way, and there's no light coming from anywhere else. You can see how small the area that's getting the light is, right? It's just the top of the bowl right here. You can also see, look at this dark part of the dirt here. Imagine if he was not in the light part, but in the dark part. Look how much darker all that kind of stuff is, right? So that just would have been a mess. This is by design that I am trying to put myself in between where the shoots are and where those lights are, and then doing everything I can to have those riders come, into that light in a way that I can get a picture of it. This is f2 12/50th of a second, ISO 4000, right? Noise, it's there, if you want to call that noise, right? But it looks kind of all the same to me, and especially when you're looking at it at full size, I can't even really see it. So I'm not worried about that. This is a good example of having a dark background and then letting the lights do their thing. So again, we can see there's a dark spot there, dark spot starting here, and then all of this is dark over here, but it's light through here. So this horse is jumping right through that cone of light. It's getting, because of the direction that it's going, it's getting light that's coming from this side and kind of behind where I am, right? So I put myself in a position where if this horse came out of the chutes and came a little bit to the left, that I was going to be basically right where I needed to be. Because this doesn't have those big grandstands that some of the other places have, right? And because the lights are aimed in such a way that it's not aimed on the fans in the seats back here. And then here is where I let the black just go to black, and that contrasts with the white of the paint horse right here. So this is what I'm trying to do, right? This kind of picture just looks better because if you imagine this bull had turned to the left like this horse had, this picture would have been a lot better. This one just has the horse jumping through the light against that dark background. That's what makes this better. So I've shot here enough to kind of be able to feel it out, to know, okay, here's where the bright spot is. Here's a safe place to shoot the rough stock from. And then I figure out what my settings are from there. In this case, 4,000, 1.4, 1250. This is from behind the roping chutes. And this is a really good example of the bright and dark spots. So just if you were not, don't even look at the roper, right? We're looking down here where it's very dark. Then we're out here where it's very bright. Then it gets dark again here. Bright, dark, bright, dark, right? You can see the same over here. Dark, dark, light, darker, lighter, darker, lighter. So all of that stuff matters. And you can't just say, oh, well, I'm just going to shoot them once they get out into the arena, when this is basically in the box and it looks better than it would have been if he had gone out even a little bit into the arena to here where it's darker, right? So we have this light, it's coming in at this angle, breaking down this picture. We can see the light it's high enough that his hat is creating this shadow right here. And then his shirt, by puffing out like this, is creating the shadow over here. And then you can judge by kind of like the wrinkles, how severe that light is, because it's like hitting off of it's only coming from one direction. There's no fill from anywhere else, like the football picture that we were looking at before. So that lets those shadows create in the creases of his shirt, right? The shadow here of the rope on the back of the horse, and the shadow on the rope itself from his hand right here. All of that comes from there only being one light that's really contributing to this exposure. So again, if I had been out in the middle of the arena shooting this, it would have been hit or miss because of these different tones in the dirt, depending on how the lights are aimed. So I can't stress this enough. You can't just shoot like you would shoot every rodeo. People, oh, where do you stand for this? It depends. And this is one of those things that it definitely depends on. This is a very similar picture taken basically exactly the same place. This is a healer coming out of the team roping box. Instead of shooting the rope and the top of the cowboy, I shot the bottom down here because I was able to get an angle and I was able to expose just for the highlights, right? Look how bright the highlights are. So I'm using a very fast or a faster shutter speed than I would. And that allows me to put all of this, right? All of this in here in shadows. And the only light that's here is this light. That's the same light that he's going through at that point. So these little detail pictures, when you have light, this is how you use them. You don't go out in the arena and let the camera pick some kind of average, because it's not going to snap like this does. This snaps because the stirrup and the engraving, the tooling in that leather, the name and the spurs, the being able to see the spur strap in there, all of that stuff is really important, especially against that really dark background. So this is 3200, which is lower on the ISO, f2, and then 12/50th of a second on the shutter speed. Again, automatic settings would never, ever get you here. It just would never. You could shoot a million pictures and it would never give you that exposure. I like to use floodlights like this in the pictures. There's not very much complicated about this, but what I'm doing here is it's too dark for me to shoot steer wrestling, because the steer wrestling runs went right into the shadows, and those pictures just would have looked awful. So I don't make them at the night perf. But this is a steer wrestler, and I'm shooting them as they're on their horse getting ready to go. So I know the cowboy is going to be more or less here. And then I'm kind of walking back and forth outside the chute here, just trying to line up these lights as the background, right? So there's no light whatsoever coming from behind me that's hitting him at all, right? His face is completely dark there because the only light here is these two big ones behind, right? And because they're so bright and because they're directly behind him, they give me this rim light that comes around here that makes it a silhouette. It just makes it look way better than any of those steer wrestling pictures that I would have been making at that time. This is from underneath the out gate, thousandth of a second, 2.8 on the aperture, and then 5,000 on the ISO. So this again shows you how tricky it can be because you have a dark spot over here, and then you have a shadow over here from the bull. It looks like the brighter stuff is a little bit behind where he is right now, but I'm still getting enough light to make this picture, but it's really all coming top down. Look at how the shadows are on the underside of his arm right here, on the underside of the bull, on his chest right here. This is very directional light from, one of these lights that's right behind me. So all I'm doing right here is hoping that he goes into a light as close to me as possible. I'm laying down. I can't get up and move somewhere else. I just have to guess, right? This bull is going to do this or something like that. And if you shoot for long enough, those kind of things will be second nature. And if you feel like taking risks, that's how you get better pictures than if you were just shooting from the fence 100 yards away or something like that. It just wouldn't look that good. This is what happens when you only have that really one source of light. So again, ignore this light back here. It's not really contributing very much at all. It's kind of, it's lighting up the other side of the horse, more or less. But there is a light source right behind me where I'm laying down, again, underneath the outgate here. But look at how the horse is angled off from me. So whereas the light is hitting her because this is the part that's like facing me and like the neck of the horse right here in the face of the horse, it gets darker as it goes back because the light is hitting it and then bouncing this way, not back into the camera. So, but this is the same exact run, just like a second later or something like that. You can see when you're only dealing with one light source, how much difference the positioning of the horse can be. So this is the same exposure, the same everything, but this one, the horse is pretty dark, and this one, the horse is pretty light. It's just because it happened to be going horizontally by me and was perpendicular with the light and bounced all that light right back to me. So these are the kind of things that I'm looking at. How can I use the light that's there? Because these are bright lights. Like, there's no question about it. The problem is there's just not enough of them to cover the arena. So to get good pictures, as good pictures as I can from those bright lights, I want to be shooting with those lights at my back and try to take advantage as much as I possibly can. So this was actually a very important rodeo for my teaching because I throw these people in. This is the first night of the workshop, is the night performance, and people get freaked out. Oh, it's really dark in here. I don't know what to do. And part of what makes it an effective workshop for me is that these lights are so bright and I can show people how to do this, right? I can set their camera up. I can show them what goes into that. I can show them where the bright and the dark areas are by taking a picture of the ground and just showing it to them. So this really brings it home, but you can do this from everywhere. What you're doing is you're shooting the light. You're not there to shoot the rodeo, right? If the rodeo was happening in the dark, you wouldn't be shooting it. You're shooting it because you're shooting the light. I can't underline this enough. You just cannot go into a rodeo that has very specific kind of lighting and shoot it like it was a noon rodeo. It's just never going to work out like that. This is another one from underneath the outgate. So the important thing of this one, again, is the directionality of everything. So you can see there's no light getting here on the underside of the bull because the bull's body itself is blocking that. There's no light that's getting on the sole of this guy's boot because the top of the boot is blocking that. You can see the light on top of his knee right here, and then you can see the shadow here. The key to all of this is you are not trying to make this right here light. You're not trying to make this light. The best you can hope for is like the jeans, and because this bull is white, but you got some reflection off of here. This is not a normal kind of action picture. You don't get a picture like this shooting from the opposite fence. But the more you kind of narrow down where the light is going to be, interesting things can happen if you're there for them. This is the arena at Clovis. This one is really, really hit or miss because of where the lights are. There are lights here and I think over here somewhere. There are lights behind the grandstand, but we have like kind of the same exact problem that we were looking at Vernal before, where this building is creating shadows in front of the bucking chutes here. They bring in portable lighting back here, but it does no good whatsoever. It's basically just to keep the grandstand lit so people don't fall down. The lights that are up there are dead by the time they're getting to the front of the chute, so they're just not helping at all. So this is a tough arena for night pictures, but again, this is mostly a daytime rodeo that just has one or two night performances. So as we can see in this picture, this is part of the lights right here. Look how bright it is down here, and then it's dark again, and then it's bright again. Dark, bright, dark, bright, bright. That's tough. It's tough to shoot like that, especially in a longer arena where the bulls have and the broncs have more ways to go. It's very difficult. But this one, you can tell where the shadows are coming from. You can see there's a horn shadow that's coming right here, but otherwise the bull is completely in the light. The rider is completely in the light. That's not from this. That's lighting up the back of him. That's from the one that's behind the chutes coming straight down like that. So this is actually it's not hard to make a picture like this because this is right in the bright spot of everything. ISO 5000, 2.8, and 1,000th of a second there. I probably could have even moved that up to 1250 and this one would have been fine. No noise, right? Nothing to really be concerned about at that point, and certainly can't see it here. This, again, with the directionality of the light, you can see the light is coming right through here. It's going through all of these hairs that the bull is throwing off. But then you can see the back, the light is hitting the back of the cowboy and the back of the bull. But by the time you get on this side of the bull, all shadows, right? Same with the back of his leg and the back of that leg over there. And you can see the really hard shadow in the ground. You can see this was happening in the lightest part, and then it gets a little bit darker. And then look how dark it is in the corners right here. Like that is very, very dark back there, like hard to see dark, right? So you just don't want to be shooting there. You want the darkness to, again, this part of it and what's behind the fur here to be the background, because that makes the subject stick out way more. So this one, because it was happening in absolutely the brightest light, was 3200 ISO, f2, and 1600ths of a second shutter speed. This one could have even been 2000th of a second, no question. But the reason that this picture looks the way it does is 1600ths of a second is fast enough to freeze even the individual hairs that are coming off of that bull. So that's why it looks like that. If I'd been down at 1000, that would have looked more blurry. It still would have looked okay, but it wouldn't have looked anywhere near as good. So that's kind of an argument as to why you would have the shutter speed at the high end kind of the acceptable range. This is what the barrel racing looks like. So you can see there's a really strong shadow of the horse here. So that means that the light that's contributing to this exposure is, you just follow it back to, from what was causing the shadow, and that's where that light pole is. You can see that the horse is getting all of that light, right? Because it's right kind of exposed to all of that light. You have her eye right here. I'm not really worried about that being in shadow because you have enough of her face right there. She's already come through the lightest part and she's in a little bit darker part, but it ends up being okay. But in the background, you can see how dark it is there, how dark it is here. Anything that's happening out there, your settings aren't going to work for that. It's just there's no light. And if you're set up to shoot the rodeo and something goes into that darkness, this is not going to work. This is tough just because of how directional it is and because of the way that the bucking chutes block the light. Again, this rodeo is 5 days long and they only have like 1.5 night performances. I go there for the 8 a.m. slack and shooting at sunset, right? If this was like all noon and night stuff, there's no way that I ever would have shot here. The one good thing that used to be you could shoot on top of the announcer stand, they've changed that around so you can't do it anymore. So this is shooting with both of the behind the chutes light coming over me. And when you shoot against the dirt like this, you're not trying to get the dirt to be really lit up. Like, you know, that can be muted like that. What we're looking for, skin tones, right? The way the horse looks here. But we're getting a little bit of light coming this way and a little bit of light coming this way. So it fills in, there's no shadows where we need to. It's all, you know, fairly lit up there. And the shadows are just from the horse on the ground. And this is a bull riding picture from up top. As you can see, again, skin tone, the way his hat looks, you know, this all looks normal. And then you can have bright spot of the dirt here and then a little bit darker here and then even darker over this way. So that's why, you know, I'm just trying to get into the light as much as possible because, again, light is the raw material in this situation. This was 3200, 2.8 and 1/800th of a second. This was 10 years ago. So this was with a D3. Even at 3200, I'm not worried about the noise there at all. Noise comes when you're trying to make the night sky light, right? Because you're just stressing out the ISO by making it go too high. That's when you get noise. If you're just shooting as it is, if you're not trying to make the camera do something that the light in the place wasn't doing, you'll be fine. This is the last arena that we'll look at for this video. This is the Santa Maria Elks Rodeo Arena. This one is a pretty big arena and it has actually pretty decent lights. They're really bright. They cover most of the important parts, right? You have here behind the chutes, here, there's another one here, 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 and I guess maybe like here, something like that. They're bright. They cover most of the arena. The problem with this arena a little bit is that to get to shoot the bulls, it's tough. There's a tent on top of this right here, and the other one is here. And the problem with that is there's banners on the fence there, there's banners on the fence there, and there's people that are drinking right under, you know, that tent right there. So when you're shooting the bulls and you have to run to get out, you can end up in somebody's table. So it's very tricky because of the angle that these go back at and because of what's here. It's a little bit unsafe. So even though there's good light in there, I'm often not able to really take advantage of it because of safety, which is a little bit unfortunate, but I'd rather have the light and be safe than push it and, you know, have an accident, right? So this kind of shows you how bright the light is here. Like this is really getting, you know, this light that's coming down here. You can see where the shadow is from his shoulder. You can see how much of this is getting the light. You can see through his cage to his face on there. You can see here the end of his rope and the shadow that's making. These are all ways that you can use the cues that are in the picture to read it. And then, of course, we have the shadow right here that's created from the bull and the rider because the light's coming down like that. You can tell this is like the bulk of the in front of the chutes area. There's a lot of light there, right? No question about it. And then most of the arena is light also. So this actually is not that hard of a rodeo to shoot at night. 3200, 1.4 on the aperture, 1/1000th of a second. I could have even have gone up from there. This is what it looks like right in front of the chutes. These are not my favorite pictures because of how much light is spilling over onto this tent. Back here, how much is shining on this outgate, on the wood in between the chutes, all that kind of stuff. You can tell there's no light that's hitting this side of this bull. This is like all in shadow. The light here is coming this way. You can see where the shadow of him is creating that on the bull, but none of him is in the shadow at all. And then you can see some of the bull creating a shadow on the chute back here. So this is just a little bit busy for what I'm trying to do. It's just there's not really a lot of great ways to use the light that's like right behind the bucking chutes like that. I was shooting at ISO 8000 because again, there are shadows in there. So this was kind of to be safe at this point. I'm just not wild about pictures that look like this. It's fine. This is what you should be doing if you're forced to shoot action at night. This is what those pictures should look like. But to me, that background having all of that light from the light that's lighting up the pictures just doesn't work for me. I just don't like it. And I would much prefer this that isn't really happening in very much light at all. Like this is out in the part of the arena that's not getting a whole lot of light. You can see that because there's like tons of shadow in the horse, shadows all over the cowboy, shadow underneath the brim of his hat. So there's like a light over here that's coming this way. It's hitting this, but it's blocking it from getting into his face, and it's lighting up his chest in the front of the horse like that. To me, this picture works because these Christmas tree lights that are in the tent under here give it just a little bit extra look. So I'm always trying to figure out how can I include things like that. If there are, we were looking at the Ferris wheel ones or the carnival ones where there were out of focus lights in the background. Same for Christmas tree lights. Can't get enough of those at all. This is using the light right at my back for barrel racing. You can tell this is like the very, very bright spot right here, and it's still pretty bright here. But again, the horse is getting all of the light that's coming right over my head and is just hitting exactly the way I want it. This is using the light. It's not, some of the ones that we've looked at before where the light was hitting the opposite side and I was getting the shadows. No, this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to camp out where the light is. And it doesn't matter that she's not going around in the barrel. This picture is going to look better than those because I'm using the light. I have that dark-ish kind of background, and you can see like the horse's mane and the shine coming off of its skin like that. 200 f2, 1,000th of a second, and ISO 4000. So this is a much tougher one. This is like from the fairly unsafe kind of shooting area, but I like having these Christmas tree lights in that tent as a background. This is ISO 4000, f2, 1,000th of a second here. The reason that I'm lower on the shutter speed and higher on the ISO here is that when you're here, the dirt is kicking up and that is eating up some of the light. It's not enough to make a huge difference one way or the other, but I was just giving myself a little bit of a chance in case more dust got kicked up. But being able to shoot at f2 is not just good for letting the light in to the sensor, it's also good for blurring out that stuff in the background. That VIP tent would not have looked good if it had been as in focus as everything else. This happened out in the middle of the arena. You can see there's like pretty bright lights that are coming. So you're getting light from this way and from this way. The only shadow here is like coming down from her hair and her hat, but all the rest of this, there's not really any shadow to speak of. And when I say shadows, it's not like you don't want shadows in the picture, but the idea is that if you're using the light, you're going to have fewer shadows on the subject, right? And you're going to have more shadows elsewhere. And then I liked how the breakaway rope was breaking off and throwing the baby powder against that black background. It makes it stick out quite a bit more. There's another one from underneath the outgate, and this is just to drive home the fact that automatic settings would not have helped you here. You have these really dark areas of the sky. You have the light on the pole that's coming through. This is like fog here that makes it kind of hazy like that. And you have a bull rider that's wearing a dark vest. So this is really tough. There's no way that automatic settings would have gotten you to this point. You have to know how to get those black skies and how to let the white go all the way to overexposed. So this is 6400 ISO 2.8 and 12/50th of a second for the shutter speed. So that's it for the ISO video that ended up being more about how to shoot inside and at night. But I think it was really more important to go further into ISO than just what the numbers are. I wanted to show you the effects of it, and I want to show you that you want to be at the right shutter speed and the right aperture. And then if you have a little bit of noise, you have a little bit of noise, but it's not going to be as bad as if you blew the exposure in the first place. So I hope you got something out of this. As always, please provide me with feedback. If something that I'm talking about here doesn't make sense, if you don't understand the why of it, if you don't understand how to make these corrections on the fly, let me know, right? I'm definitely willing to spend all the time that it takes to teach you these things so that you know them, because once you get by this stuff, like this is the most basic stuff there is, right? So spend a little bit of extra time, get solid on the exposure triangle, understand how the shutter, aperture, and sensor all work together, understand what those things are actually doing, and not in an abstract kind of sense, but in a really real sense. What's happening in my camera right now? You want to know that kind of stuff. So once you get this stuff down, then being creative is so much easier, because you're not worried about, oh, I don't know how to use my tools very well. I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know how to make corrections. Once you do, you'll be able to change on the fly, get better pictures in the moment, and not have to like wait months in between trying different things and learning what the results of those are. So this has been Matt Cohen for Matt Cohen Photo Workshops. Thanks for watching.